All right, let's fast forward to the Galapagos Islands, the islands for which Darwin is best known. So, right off the bat, what I want you to recognize is the Galapagos Islands, like the Hawaiian Islands to the north in the Pacific, are volcanic in origin. So, you can see the cinder cones here from these ancient volcanoes. So these islands gradually arose from the sea floor. What that means is the only species that could get to the Galapagos Islands were those that traveled by wind. So think spiders ballooning on silk in the air, wave. So think lizards floating on masses of downed logs, or wings. Think insects, bats, and birds. The only species that colonize volcanic islands are those that can get there on wind, wave, or wing. And it's here, in the Galapagos Islands, that Charles Darwin realizes that species on the islands clearly resemble those on the mainland of South America, but they have clearly changed. So consider the neotropical cormorant. This is a very common species here in the Phoenix Valley. My students and I document these guys every time we do a bio blitz down at the Basin Meridian Wildlife Area or Tres Rios. My point is, though, on the mainland, cormorants have very long and powerful wings that are quite capable of flight. But in the Galapagos cormorants just have these teeny weeny little vestigial wings. These birds are completely flightless. I will say that those tiny little vestigial wings are very good for helping them steer under the water. But again, remember, the Galapagos Islands were never connected to mainland South America. They're volcanic in origin. So that means there are no mammalian predators in the Galapagos. No foxes, no bobcats, nothing that's trying to eat you that you need to fly away from. And wings and flight, that's energetically very, very expensive. So if there's nothing to fly away from, long wings do not help insular or island dwelling cormorants better survive and reproduce. Everywhere Darwin looked, he saw species that appeared to have changed, some quite dramatically. So the iguanas, which are arboreal or tree dwellers on mainland Ecuador, like you see on the top right, here in the Galapagos, had become aquatic. They were marine iguanas who could now swim in the ocean and dive down and graze on nutritious algae growing on the rock. Darwin couldn't believe it that there were marine iguanas. And the story goes that he tosses the iguana into the water and watches it swim back, and then tosses it again and again and again. He gets lots of replications on his science experiment, and he realizes that these guys are natural swimmers, very unusual for iguanas. And let us not forget the giants, the Galapagos tortoises. These are tortoises that were big enough for Charles Darwin to ride on their backs, which he joyfully does and journals about. But what Darwin notices is that these tortoises have unique shell shapes dependent upon the islands on which they live. So those tortoises that lived on arid islands, dry islands, and needed to browse high up in the shrubs on prickly pear cactus, they had shells that curved backwards. and elongated necks, whereas those that were found on wet islands had domed shells and were foraging on grasses. He sees the same pattern in the bill shape of mockingbirds. Different mockingbirds found on different islands were exploiting different resources and had unique bill shapes. And of course, Darwin collects a myriad of different Galapagos finch species, a group of birds for which he'll forever be associated. But again, just like the mockingbird, the shape of the different species of finches, the shape of their bills, speaks volumes to the trained biologist about what resources, what foods they're specializing in. So this is a vegetarian tree finch. It's got a beak shape like a parrot, and it's exploiting fruit. Whereas the warbler finch is a little insectivorous finch with a small, thin, pointy beak for probing at insects. In closing, Darwin leaves England a student of natural theology. Darwin's a creationist when he gets on the HMS Beagle, but he now returns to England with a head full of new ideas based on actual observations of nature. Darwin returns to England an evolutionist.